please.
Yes. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present something that I've really only started to look into, so it's still very preliminary. But as you'll see, there are some interesting findings, at least from the American side. I'll be talking about bear simulators in some Latin American varieties of Spanish. If you don't mind that I see it, but not that well, so I think things go well as well like that. So, this is something you all know already. If people were to describe this picture, some people would answer the man had to go to hospital. Other people, other native speakers of English, would answer had to go to the hospital. This is a well-known variation, long-case variation, and non-determination in the article. When you go to other examples, to describing other pictures, here everybody would definitely agree with the man is watering plant, and everybody would say that the man is watering plant is totally unacceptable. So example 2 behaves differently than example 1, go to the hospital with regard to the obituaries of the definite article. Obviously this is because in the first case weak definite, and here in the second case we have a strong definite. So as we saw in the first example, if we look at article languages, we see that there's variation in whether they use weak definites or bare singulars. Variation can be language dependent, as in Italian parla teatro, Spanish voy al teatro, Portuguese voy al teatro, I go to the theater, but you also get variety dependent variation, as in British English, go to hospital, American English, go to the hospital, German auf die Arbeit gehen, go to the work, or auf Arbeit gehen, which is literally just to go to work. And finally, there's also an axiom-dependent variation within one variety. An example would be Italian vado al teatro, literally I go to the theater, but same language Italian, vado al cinema, I go to the cinema. Still, despite all this variation we get, there are at least language-specific tendencies. Spanish, for example, is rather known as a language that tends to have weak definites, while English, oftentimes at least, has bare singulars instead. Ir a la escuela, go to school, ir a la iglesia, go to church, ir al cine, and you get variation in English, go to cinema, go to the cinema. But in Alaka, for example, writes that in Spanish, the use of singular count nouns with an article is generally speaking exceptional. My talk today is going to try and make 4 points. The first one is that Spanish allows more bare singulars than is hitherto known. Secondly, this is especially true of some Latin American varieties of Spanish, depending especially also on lexemes. Third, a methodological point I'd like to make is that modern dialectology can and should make use of social network data and experimental data alike in combination. And fourth and finally, this is really a very loose idea of mine, very preliminary, and I'd like to put forward as a basis for discussion the idea that the expansion of bare singulars could be one means to compensate different restructuring patterns in the case marking system of such varieties. This is really work in progress and very loose idea, as I just said. The outline of the talk, we could just finish the introduction, and now we turn to a very short terminological limitation, something that's well known, so I'm going to go quickly over that. The distinction between strong definites on the one hand and weak definites and bare singulars on the other. Should be photographed. So, as you all know, it's mostly argued today that definite article indicates uniqueness or nationality. This is something you can see in 12. If you say we ordered the plant in the living room, the sentence is only successful or felicitous if there's only one plant in the living room. If there are more plants, then you have to have some kind of prejudice or information that things on the plant unequivocally. Strong definites, this is something important, strong definites behave differently from weak definites, and secondly, weak definites, as has been shown in literature, same as bare singulars. So you get strong definite on the one hand, and weak definite and bare singulars to get the clustering together on the other hand. If you look at the example of semantic number neutrality, which is something I already talked about, you see in 13, tomorrow I have to order the flower. It's really strange to continue the sentence with something like, I'm sure every single one of them is totally dry. The fact this is strange is because strong definites are not semantically number neutral. With weak definites this is different because they are semantically number neutral. If you say 14, tomorrow I have to take the train. I'm sure every single one I have to take will be late as always. That does work. And the same also applies to the bare singular counterpart. Tomorrow I have to travel by train. I'm sure every single one I have to take will be late as always. There are a number of properties in which weak definites and bare singulars behave the same and differently from strong definites. I'm not going to go into details, as this is all well known. Just to show you this table to demonstrate, to recall that there's enough evidence for the assumption that weak definites and bare singulars go to hospital, go to the hospital, are in fact very likely just two morphological variants of the same semantic class. Both are pseudo-incorporation structures. Importantly, this fact, namely that weak definites and bare singulars are two morphological variants of the same class, semantic class, means nothing else that the cases of variation we saw at the very beginning are, in a sense, expected. I already said at the beginning of the talk that the Spanish. I already said at the beginning of the talk that Spanish has to be a language that rather has weak definites, unlike, for example, English. Okay, the examples again from the beginning. Nevertheless, Spanish too does allow or even require bare singular cases in some cases. Bare singulars are, so to speak, semantically anchored in Spanish as well. Here are some examples: hablar por teléfono, tener novia, llevar sombrero, ir a misa, estar en clase, estar en cama, viajar en tren, comer kombucha. Beyond these examples on the last slide, however, if one looks at the literature, which is quite scarce on the matter, you can find cursory remarks that in the Rio de la Plata Spanish, that is parts of Uruguay and Argentina, that these varieties do allow more bare singulars than other varieties, namely with the preposition in. So you get examples like a asesora seguramente está en facultad, tengo un coche en taller, al salir de prisión, estudiar en biblioteca y se compra en supermercado. Arriba. Regarding these Rio de la Plata and bare singulars, the problem is that we're faced with a number of issues. First, as I said, these are only cursory remarks in the literature. There are no real empirical works on them. There are no systematic studies on lexical variation, and a pan-Hispanic perspective is completely missing. So based on A to D, I propose to address the following research questions. First, does Rio de la Plata Spanish also allow bare singulars with another preposition, namely a? Are there, in fact, other bare singular hotspots beyond the Rio de la Plata Spanish area, which is the only one known in the literature? And if so, which Spanish varieties allow which bare singulars with this preposition? And finally, does it make sense to do, or what are the issues one has to bear in mind when doing macrodialectology with Twitter and experimental data alike? I will first approach these questions with a study based on Twitter, in which in total I examined 8 nominal lexemes with the preposition A. These were the following ones you see in the table to the left: escuela, school; colegio, which is also school; cine, cinema; piscina, pool; médico, doctor; teatro, theater; peluquería, hairdresser; and iglesia, church. I chose exactly these lexemes because, I chose exactly these lexemes because, judging from the literature, they present cross-linguistic variation between weak definites and bare singulars, and because I was able to document previously unknown, to the best of my knowledge, previously unknown but fairly regular occurrences as bare singulars in initial pilot searches on Twitter. And then extracted large amounts of data using R and an additional package, and this only obviously from users with data in their geographical data. And you go back slightly more. So what you see here is a Twitter syntax string which I used to retrieve the data. So the goal for me in this, the first step was to extract 500 occurrences for each noun as bare singular, and 500 with the definite article, which I succeeded in doing for almost all lexemes, a little more than 7,000 records altogether, of which I could use a bit more than 6,000. Some users just gave fantasy locations and profiles, something like I live around the corner or I live on the moon or wherever. So this had to be cleaned manually. Next slide, please. And here are some of the documented bare singulars from Twitter. One example for each lexeme study. Lo mejor de la escuela pública, which is from Argentina, to go to public school. Para ir a colegio, from Argentina, go to school. Aguantaría ir a cine, to go to cinema. Que rico ir a piscina, both from Colombia. 33, para ir a Mexico, from Chile, and so on. Next slide, please. You can see the first descriptive results. The relevant column is the red one here. The numbers in this column, can you read it more or less?
The numbers, yes.
I think that the farther you away from the screen, the better you can read.
Yeah, exactly.
So these numbers are factors. In the first line, you can see Escuela Argentina factor 1.0. That means these factors represent the ratio of bare singular to definite article within the occurrences from one single country. So for example, the factor 1.0 in this first line means that in my data set there are as many ir a escuela from Argentina than there are ir a la escuela from Argentina. So same number more or less for this country. And you see factors rise and they go quite high. I'm going to say more on that soon. Next slide, please. This is another second important column. What you see here is the, for every nominal lexeme, so to speak, the winning country. So the country with the highest factor in favor of the bare singular. This column shows first that the statement in the literature that the Rio de la Plata Spanish hotspot of bare singulars with the preposition en is apparently also true for the preposition a, because Argentina is 3 times the winning country for ir a la escuela, ir a colegio, ir a peluquería. So first 2 lines at the top and the penultimate at the bottom. Second, what this also shows, and this is a very new result, as far as I know at least, is that Argentina is not the winning country for all lexemes studied. We also have Colombia 3 times, ir a cine, ir a piscina, and ir a teatro, but once each, Chile and Venezuela. And this is where you see the countries, the winning countries mapped. So here you can see the size of the stars representing the size of the factor. And you see very big stars in Colombia, meaning that the factor of bare singulars in favor of bare singulars was very high. Next slide, please. So all the descriptive results I just showed you can also be confirmed inferentially. Country is a statistically significant predictor for the result of the dependent variable definite article bare singular. This is shown by binomial mixed logistic regression analysis, which I can talk about in the discussion if you want. Now, this statistical analysis, the inferential analysis, even yields a new third result, namely that Argentina, yes, is one hotspot of Spanish bare singulars, but it is not the largest hotspot. The largest hotspot, according to the length I studied, seems to be Colombia. As I said, if you're interested in exact statistics, I have a slide on that later on. Next slide. Next one. I'm not going to talk about that one. But instead, go to the second empirical study, which is a very basic preliminary experimental acceptance study, in which I did because we cannot really be sure how reliable Twitter data is. I built 8 very basic test items with the 8 nouns as bare singulars, 24 fillers, all the same length, 8 syllables, and I then tested the items in 4 blocks, 7 items each, randomized the blocks with 1 bare singular per block, and had them rated on a Likert scale, on a 7-point Likert scale. This is how it looked like at the end, so it's very basic, no context, just a very first approach to each. All in all, I managed to get 226 participants, 29 from Spain, 38 from Colombia, 43 from the Rio Plata region, 33 from other Argentinian regions, and 42 from Venezuela, 41 from Chile. All participants were born and resided in the respective country, and received a recompense of $3 as a reward. In the remainder of the talk, I will be focusing on. Can you go back, please? In the remainder of the talk, I'll be focusing on the speakers, on the participants from Spain, Colombia, and Buenos Aires. So let's start with the result for Rio Plata, Argentina. We see the box plot in the green column here to the right. A very high median of 7 for Ir Appengeria. So people like it. It's something like going to the hairdresser. The red line at the top of the green box. This high median also correlates with a rather high arithmetic mean for Ir Appengeria, which is the value of 4.65 in a second time. Otherwise, the results for Buenos Aires were not very striking, except for the fact that we found high polarizations with some lexemes. So some people with Ir Escuela rate Ir Escuela very high, others really low. Very little in between. Next slide, please. So against the background of the first Twitter study, this means that for Argentina, the Twitter data are only partially confirmed experimentally, namely only for Ir Appengeria, because here, no, go back please. Here, Argentina was the winning country for this lexeme, the green thing, the table. Our Twitter results were not confirmed for Ir Escuela and Ir Colegio, because here the medians in the experiment were very low for Argentina. Now, results for Colombia look completely different. We see in the box plot suddenly 3 high medians. The red lines in the first, the third, and the fourth box plot, where we have medians of 7 for Irafine and Iracristina, and a median of 5 for Iracapra. Obviously, these 3 lexemes have high means as well, and what is also very striking is that we have very low variance rates for Irafine and Iracristina, which means that everybody liked Iracristina and Irafine. Next slide, please. So here again, comparing the results to our first study, the Twitter study. Here the Twitter data is confirmed completely because Colombia was the winning country in the Twitter data exactly for these 3 lexemes that got high medians in the experimental study. Next slide, please. Some words finally on Spain. Here on the right side, you see in the box plot that most bear singers did score low as expected, but we also have two median scores of 5 for Ira Peruqueria and Ira Escuela, the red bars. And that's surprising because this should be allowed in Peninsula Spanish. Again, for these two lexemes, we have high polarizations, very scattered results. About half of the participants rating very high, the other half very low. In any case, though, these results are discrepant compared to the Twitter study. Next slide, please. With regard to Chile and Venezuela, the results from the Twitter study were not confirmed by experimental. Next slide. Some inferential statistical remarks. What is of interest here is especially the right column. We see that the descriptive results that was presented are confirmed differentially with regression analysis, quite clearly at least for Ira Cristina in Colombia, with minor qualifications also for Ira Teatro in Colombia, Ira Peruqueria in the Rio de Plata area, and Ira Escuela in Spain. Next slide. So I'm going to summarize the answers to the research questions based on the two studies. Does Rio de Plata Spanish also allow bear singulars with A? Well, out of the 8 lexemes, at least with the lexeme Peruqueria, Ira Peruqueria, are there other bear singular hotspots beyond the Rio de Plata area? There's definitely one in Colombia, Ira Teatro, Ira Cristina. This is not the case for Chile and Venezuela, and there are data that are puzzling from Spain. And thirdly, it's a good thing, from my opinion, to approach geolinguistic questions by Twitter data and experimental data, but it's very important to combine them because Twitter data alone seems to be prone to run the risk of providing or of giving false positive results. Next slide, please. So in this following last part, I'm going to really venture an idea which is very preliminary and very loose, and it's something I'd like to test in the future concerning the expansion of bear singulars in other varieties of Spanish. Next slide, please. So, in the literature, when you look at the literature is largely defeatist in making predictions about the distribution of bear singulars being definites. Ndffe recently wrote that there is no single grammatical principle parameter that can cover this kind of variation. That is, it is exclusive to make predictions about the distribution of short-wheel definites and bear singulars. So what I would like to put to discussion now is that the expansion, at least in some varieties of Spanish, of bear singulars might be one way to compensate, or might be a consequence of restructuring processes in the case marking system. Next slide. So in Spanish, as is well known, when you have a noun woman, there is a case of position nominative accusative that can be established with the accusative morpheme a. Zero marking the nominative. We have what is called differential object marking, which is well known, meaning that you have this option, grosso modo, animate objects only. You say veo a la mujer, I see the woman. You say veo la mesa, I see the table. Next slide. In Argentina, according to the literature, which is the first country which has some more bear singulars than was expected, something happens in this case system. At least with topicalized inanimates, the literature says that you can get differential object marking. You can say 39, la escucho con mucha atención a la ópera, you can say 40, a los libros los envolvió en papel madera. These cases would be ungrammatical in other varieties of Spanish. Next slide. Now this expansion of the accusative marker a means that the sequence la plus noun is more unambiguously nominative in Argentina than in other varieties of Spanish. You can see this in the blue table here. However, this does not match the case value of la plus noun in weak definites. Ir a la peluquería. Ir la peluquería is oblique case. And so a possible idea could be that changes of the type ir a la peluquería weak definite, ir a peluquería que singular could be processed to further avoid non-nominative uses of la plus noun. So basically, the idea would be that the changes we get, we start to observe conform to something, which is the principle of one form, one function. So la plus noun has unequivocally nominative in this variety. Something I won't really discuss. Maybe think it's not worth exploring, but I just continue on it like that. Next slide, please. The second country with a clearly increased presence of bare singulars is Colombia. And here, unlike in Argentina, we have evidence for receding differential object marker with A. So these are two examples from Colombian Netflix series. Necesito que me entregues la gente que mató a mi primo, agarraron el muchacho este. I have many more. This seems to be quite common in Colombian Spanish. You would need the case morpheme A, where you have the circle with the cross circle. So this change means that in Colombian Spanish, the sequence la plus noun is more often syncretic for nominative and accusative than in other varieties of Spanish, which again can be seen in this table here. So here, a possible idea possible path to investigate could be that changes of the type ir a la piscina, with definite ir a piscina, their singulars, occur to avoid further syncretism of la plus noun for another third case, which in our structures would be oblique. So put differently, we would not have one form, one function here in Colombia, but by expanding their singulars, we would at least be closer to this ideal state, namely by avoiding third case syncretism. This is all I wanted to say. Next slide, please. And I'm going to close with a short outlook. We saw, next slide, please. We saw that Latin American singulars instead of weak definites are present, especially in Colombia, maybe also in Argentina. They definitely are an under research and typologically also highly interesting phenomenon in the realm of non-determination. And there are many open issues, polarization of the data, and so on. And I'd really like to look at that in more detail in the future. Thank you very much.
¿Preguntas ahora? No. ¿Después? Yo siempre me olvido de eso. La noticia, en varias. Okay. Okay, so now we have Maria from the University of Leipzig, who is going to talk about demonstrative aspects in some Thank you so much. Okay. So today we're going to talk about demonstratives, and demonstratives are usually analyzed as phrasal evidence, right? So most people would agree that they occupy a specifier, the extended projection of noun, and this would be spec DP or spec DEMP or something like that, but at the moment they don't agree that they're phrasal. So in this talk I will present data from fieldwork of fixing, which is an analytic language for Kenya, and I will argue that demonstratives should be analyzed as beheads and not as specifiers in this language. will have to be scrolling. Okay, so the first point I would make is that demonstratives are heads in this language. The second point is that there is a distinction between the proximal demonstrative on the one hand and the medial and distal demonstrative on the other hand. And this highlights that demonstratives would have more uniform syntax even within the same language. Now, other languages that have been argued to have demonstratives that are deep-heads include Thai and Mandarin. And interestingly, these are languages that lack definite articles, which is also the case in Kitsigis. So Kitsigis doesn't have definite articles. And okay, so interestingly, there are also languages that lack definite articles, and in these languages, the demonstrative is sometimes used to express definiteness. So this is also the case in Kitsigis. And so it is possible that languages with such systems represent the intermediate stage, right? The well-known characterization path from demonstrative to definite article. So first, something that is phrasal becomes a deep-head before becoming an article. Okay. So some background on the language. So Kitsigis is the native variety of Kalenjin, which is a cluster of dialects of the southern Nilotic branch of Sahara. It's spoken by approximately 2 million speakers in Kenya. And so you might actually know the Kenyan long-distance runners. They're all from the Kalenjin tribes. So that might have seen some Kalenjin speakers. Okay, so some information on the language for you to understand the data.
No, that is.
Yeah, okay. So the language has PSO, word order, in the clausal domain, and also the language has a system of dominant ATR harmony. So this will play a role later on, right? So ATR is an advanced tone group. And so what that means is a plus ATR morph anywhere in the word will cause all other vowels to become plus ATR. And the data in this handout comes from my home field work with 1080 speakers in Kenya and the US. Okay, so let's jump into the data on why demonstratives are probably heads in Kitsigis. Okay. So first, some information on the morphological makeup of the nouns in the language. So Kitsigis does not have a dedicated definite article, and their nouns are usually interpreted as either definite or indefinite depending on the context, which is common in languages without an article. However, it has to be noted here that what I call a bare noun is not so bare. Nouns are always morphologically complex. So you see an example in one. So here we have a child or a child, and we have the root child followed by by a thematic suffix, so these are usually vowels or implied or vowel combination, followed by what is called the secondary suffix in the literature. And historically, this was a specificity marker, but it has lost specificity semantics and now is there just as a nominal marker. However, it is still a complementary distribution with demonstratives. And we see an example in 2. So this child, here we see that we don't have the secondary suffix anymore. We have a demonstrative suffix. Okay. Now moving on to the demonstratives, the language has 3 demonstratives, which indicate distance from the speaker. So we have proximal, medial, and distal. They agree with a number. And here you see examples in 3 from the medial and distal one, right? So that child and that child over there. And so what is interesting about demonstratives is that they have properties of affixes, right? So in most languages, the demonstratives would be dependent on logical words, but in physics, they have properties of affixes. So the first thing that they form is sort of constituent with the noun. And here's some anecdotal evidence that if my speakers see my notes when I write and they have a dash, they say, why do you have a dash? That's one word. So they have intuitions that they form one word with the noun. As you can see from data like the ones in 3, they attach to this form of the noun la qua, which on its own is not an independent word in the language, because if the demonstrative is not there, you always have that secondary suffix that is a nominal marker. Third, what you can see in 3 is that the thematic vowel preceding the demonstrative is lengthened, whereas we get vowel lengthening, which is a regular phonological process in the language where we have an affix with a CE phonological shape preceding another affix, but we never see it across word boundaries. So you can see an example of that in 4. So in 4 we have that make the child cry, and so here we have a causative suffix, which is in the box on the verb, and this causative suffix has a short vowel. And what we see in B is that if you combine it with an applicative, now the vowel of the causative will be lengthened. Right? So this is a regular phonological process in the language. If you have a CE affix and then you add another affix, you get vowel lengthening. And so that's exactly what we see in 3 with the demonstrative, right? So which indicates that this form part of the same word. The other property of those demonstratives is that they can never scope over both conjuncts in a coordination. So let's see the example. So in 5, we have dogs and elephants, those, right? And here, this means dogs and those elephants, but it can never be those dogs and elephants, right? So those cannot modify both conjuncts. And this has been claimed to be a property of bound determiners for specifically, so affixal determiners. And so all these data indicate that these are real affixes in the language, and it's interesting because affixal demonstratives are rare across linguistically. So for example,
Battery. The battery, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, so for example, these psychology of demonstratives claim that there are no convincing cases of affixal demonstratives, basically. Okay. Now, all these affixal properties of these demonstratives receive a straightforward explanation in their D-heads, where we may some other head in the extended projection of the noun if you assume the theory where affixes correspond to heads. There are some more arguments which are but these will depend a little bit on the theory. So what we see in 6 is that demonstrative fixes can co-occur with pronouns. So here you have the third person singular pronoun with a demonstrative. And this means something like this one over here. And this is also relatively rare to have pronouns co-occurring with demonstratives. But James, in his work on demonstratives in Mandarin, where he argues that they are D-heads, claims that this follows.
No, maybe it's not.
then the final, and this is even more clear, an argument comes from relative clauses, but this will depend on the specific analysis of relative clauses. So if we do 7, so in 7 we see a relative clause, which involves the demonstrative. So here we have child, this I like, and this means this child that I like. So you do have a demonstrative definition. You don't have a convert relativizer. Here I should say that there is no convert relativizer name, which is a complementary distribution with the demonstrative. So the demonstrative here is doing the job which is using the relative clause. However, what is interesting is that it does not seem to be inside the relative clause. So you receive a coordination. So child is I like, and here I have to give context because I was trying to see if you agree with everything, but the result is the same with respect to the conjunction marker that we use. So child is I like, and this I saw means this child that I like and this one that I saw. And I never mean this child that I like and that I saw, which is what happens in most people language with coordinate relative clauses. And I think this indicates that the demonstrative here, even though it seems to be introducing relative clause, it's outside of the relative clause. And so in my dissertation, I analyzed the structures along the lines of case analysis of relative clauses where we have a DK and CP complement. And I argue that this demonstrative spells out the DK is something that makes it CP. So that would be another argument for the case analysis. Now, what we see so far, and maybe I haven't stressed enough, is that all three, by the way, demonstratives begin the same in respect that I said so far. You can also have the medial or distal one. You can also have the medial or distal one if you use relative clauses, for example. However, we do find some interesting differences between the proximal demonstrative and the medial or distal one. Okay. So here, as a reminder, the language is a system of dominant ATR harmony. Okay, so plus ATR vowel somewhere in the word will cause all other vowels to become plus ATR. Okay. Now, what we observe is that there's a difference in the harmony profile of the proximal demonstrative and the medial or distal one. So, what we see in 9 is a proximal demonstrative. So here the stem, so the child is minus ATR, and so the proximal demonstrative will harmonize. You see a minus ATR vowel. In B, the word for whole is plus ATR, and here the proximal demonstrative will harmonize, and that's when it's plus ATR vowel. Right? So the proximal demonstrative is in the harmony domain. Okay. What is interesting now is 10. So in 10, you see that the medial demonstrative has a plus ATR vowel in both A and B. So in B, the vowels are plus ATR of the noun, so we cannot know from that what is going on. But in 10, the vowels of the noun remain minus ATR, right? So the plus ATR demonstrative does not cause the noun to become plus ATR, which is what we would expect if they were in the same harmony domain. 11 makes a similar point. Here, the distal demonstrative is minus ATR in both A and B, irrespective of the ATR value of the stem, right? So what this data show is that the proximal demonstrative is in the harmony domain of the noun, but the medial and distal demonstratives are not in the same harmony domain. We also see difference in tones. So the proximal one has a low tone, the medial and distal one will form it with having a high tone. However, I don't know what the tone is. Okay, now what is very interesting is that the difference with respect to harmony correlates with the difference in the syntax of possessive constructions. Okay, so the language is a possession construction that we see in 12. So here we have child plus a possessive affix on the noun followed by the possessor, basically that's child. And this construction has many similarities to the construct state is splitting. So the order of the elements is fixed, nothing can intervene. So we can scroll down. Yes. So for example, what you see in 13 is that if you want to say the best one child or the best tall child, so if you want to modify the possessee, the modifiers have to follow the possessor. They have to follow the whole unit. They can never intervene. Okay. Now, what is interesting about this construction is that this possessive app, right, can only attach either a bare noun, as a reminder, a bare noun is something that has a secondary suffix on it, or a noun plus a proximal demonstrative. So you see in 14, these children of people like that, you can say children is a noun, you have an allomorph, F, so the possessive counter app has an allomorph, F, in the case of the demonstrative. But interestingly, the medial and distal ones cannot occur in that position. And so you see in 14b, children, those, so this is, sorry, this is the gloss form there. This is the medial one. No, distal. This is the distal one, sorry. So A is proximal, B should be distal, sorry. Okay. So those children of people like that, here you cannot have that. And it's the same with the medial one, right? So what's interesting is that we see that there is a both phonological and a syntactic difference between the two correlate in the sense that they show that the proximal demonstrative is closer to the noun or in a smaller domain than the medial and distal, right? So the proximal is in the harmony domain of the noun and can appear in this construction that seems to require small things, right? So app can only attach either just the noun or a noun and demonstrative. Whereas the medial and distal ones that are outside of the harmony domain, they can also not appear in this construction that requires small things. Okay. So what is interesting about these demonstratives and what our analysis has captured is that they seem to be similar for some things, right? So they share all the affixal properties, right? The vowel length, fact, same prosodic domain, etc. They all use the clauses, right? So they are the same for a bunch of things. But they are also different for harmony facts and the restriction of the possessee size. Okay. And here we'll present a TM analysis that can capture these facts. One important part of this assumption is that we have two T layers, basically, which here I call little T and big T, following cheapest terminology, but there are other people who have made similar suggestions to different names to the head. So maybe we can look at the tree. Yeah. Okay. So here we have the noun, right? So here I show you the tree for what the possessive structure would look like. So we have the noun, and then this little t head, and then the possessive head, which will be spelled out with the possessive marker, the possessor is the specifier, and then the big T head on top. Okay. And now let's see how we can get these to work. So the further assumption that is needed here is that we see this as an T movement. So if we have time in the appendix, I have told you more about it, T movement. But here we'll just be assuming that that's how you get word order in the DP. And one thing to note here is that the C is strictly noun initial. So you never find anything ever to see the noun. You here have an example of the quantifier, but basically everything has to follow the noun. There are no examples where something precedes the noun. Okay. Now, in order to account for the properties of the demonstrative share in this, I argue that they both spell out the head. Okay? And in order to explain where they're different, I argue that they spell out a different D head. Right? So the proximal demonstrative will be spelling out the lower little D head. The medial and distal ones will be spelling out the higher. Okay. So how would that explain harmony facts? So for the harmony facts, you would just have to say that the domain for harmony is little dp, right? So anything above little dp will be outside of the harmony domain. And this seems to be making the correct cut because the possessive is also outside of the harmony domain, which I didn't mention. Okay? So the possessive is also always outside of the harmony domain of the noun. Here, however, we do have to assume that you could have different subdomains within the word for different phonological processes, but there is reason for that. Okay. Now let's construction would be derived. So you have something like 17, so this child would be met. So the idea that we have a child, then you have the proximal demonstrative, the will be, the possessive will be F, and then you have a zero in this case, and then you have movement all the way up to G, so head movement all the way up to G, and this will create the complex word Lavoisier, right? So if you then get Lavoisier, then which is the correct surface order for 17. Here also since after the movement, the demonstrative, so it will be, and the possessive will end up being adjacent to the complex head. Most theories of allomorphy will also say that this is locally not condition allomorphy. As a reminder, the possessive is usually up, but it has the allomorph F when it attaches to the demonstrative. Now, since in this structure that I suggest, possessive selects for legal DP, only the proximal demonstrative is expected to appear as a possessive, right? However, there is still the question of what rules out something like possessive followed by demonstrative or distal that I have said spell out D, right? And I mean, unfortunately, it's not the agreement stipulative, right? So by the way, this order is not allowed, so this is what I can show you nicely. So you can never have child, possessive, demonstrative, right? So you cannot do that. And here I see two possibilities of solving this problem. So either you have to have a stipulation and say that a T with distal or medial demonstrative cannot select from possessive, not ideal. I think something that looks more promising is the second possibility. Maybe there is a constraint is having these two. So it will be in the D and that will have non-identical features basically. But this is something that still needs to be worked out. Why something like 19 Okay. Now, the discussion of what this data might tell us in general. So, I have shown that demonstratives should be analyzed as heads in cities, and that different kinds of demonstratives could be merged in different heights, even within the same language. And so, this analysis supports theories which are to for an articulated layer, and or analysis which argue that what is distributively determined could be occupying different projections in the D. And it also supports theories that accept chronological subdomains inside words. So why is that? Because for harmony we have one domain, but for things like vowel lengthening, for example, we have a different domain, right? Because for vowel lengthening, all demonstratives behave like, for prosodical sequence, they behave like, but for harmony, we have different domains within the same word. And as I said in the introduction, there are other languages that have been argued to have demonstratives as heads. I'm aware of Mandarin and Thai, for example. And in these languages, it has been shown that demonstratives can sometimes act as dead articles. This is also the case in cities. So the consultants sometimes translated descriptions using the proximal demonstrative. So sometimes they may give it a sentence in English and they translate. Sometimes they will give it a form of the noun with the proximal demonstrative. There are also other cases where the proximal demonstrative does not seem to have spatial diacritics semantics. So 20 is an interesting example. So the language, in addition to the demonstratives that have to do with distance from the speaker, also have a series of demonstratives that are called temporal demonstratives. And so these are very interesting. So the language in the verbal group has a three-way distinction in tense. So things that happened earlier today versus yesterday versus long ago. And in the verbal domain, it would be ka, ko, ki. And in the nominal domain, you have kan, kon, and kinye. You see the kinye. And so what this means is when you add that to a noun, it has an anaphoric use specifying the time that the entity denoted by the DP was relevant to this course. So here we have that one kinye, that child from long ago. So this means we're talking about a child that And these temporal demonstratives always attach to the form of the noun that includes the proximal demonstrative. But here the proximal demonstrative does not indicate any distance in terms of location. So here it really just serves to make the noun definite so that you get the anaphoric use. And so it's possible that these languages represent intermediate stage in the grammaticalization path that is quite well known, right? Where you have demonstratives becoming articles, right? It's a very common source of definite article structure, basically. And I think that what these languages show is that you have this intermediate stage of the demonstrative, which was phrasal, being reanalyzed as a dehead, which later becomes an article. Now, there's some further similarities between these languages that I find interesting, but I don't have an answer for, but I have them here. So, another interesting similarity between Portuguese and Mandarin is the use of a linking element in nonverbal communication. So, in Portuguese, you see one, they call child. So, here you must have this thing that I call relativizer, but you can show that it's actually a determiner. And this is obligatory there, so you cannot have an adjective directly modifying the noun. And by the way, adjectives are real adjectives, they're not verbs, for example. Okay. The other thing is that James argues that in the presence of high modifiers in Mandarin, the demonstrative loses its spatial diaspora semantics. And this seems to be the case in Portuguese, though in Portuguese it's a bit more complicated. So it will scroll down. Okay, in 22, we have this one called child. And here we have child, this one, and then we have this again, called, that here introduces the relative clause. And here we have, of course, spatial diaspora is interpreted somewhere, but we have two instances of the demonstrative, right? So it cannot be that it's interpreted in both cases. So depending on how one interprets those data, this could be similar to what James says for Mandarin, where demonstratives can lose their spatial diaspora semantics in the context of high modifiers. And so you know the question whether these modification facts follow in any way from the weird, let's say, status of demonstratives. And I do not have an answer to that. Now, the other reason why I think it's interesting is that even if demonstratives as heads is typologically rare, it does have consequences for theories of universal 20, which have been quite, say, popular in the last years. For example, Chimpue's theory of word order variation in Ndffe assumes that demonstratives are universally phrasal and universally generated in the same position, the same Ndffe. And what the PCP data show is that both of these assumptions seem to be wrong for this particular language, right? It doesn't mean that like that for other languages, right? Because what we saw is that first, they do not seem to be the specifier, and second, the medial and distal demonstrative behave differently from the proximal one. So you have, they cannot be universal phase generated in the same phase. Though I think with cryptography there could be a way around that. Okay. And what is interesting though is that it does have some orders that seem challenging for Chimpue's theory, which we're not going to avoid, but they do receive a straightforward explanation if we assume that demonstratives occupy a head, either blue or AT head, and everything. I don't know how much to say.
You've got some minutes. 3, 4?
Maybe we could go then to the result pages. Yeah, okay, so it was okay. So in 23, for example, I mean, this is not an order discussed by Chimpues, but here we have children, those all three, meaning all these three children. And so here, given what this now means, you wouldn't expect that the base generation order is something like numeral level multiplied quantifier, right? Because this means all of these three children. Okay. And if you assume this merge order and that everything is the specifier condition, and you assume sequence theory, so I'm not showing it here because I guess it was before, but you cannot derive that. Okay, so if you only assume phrasal movement, everything is the specifier, and you have that merge order, the order that you see in sequence cannot be derived. However, the weird, so the problematic part comes from the position of the demonstrative, right? So in general, it's the position of the demonstrative is what causes problems, let's say. But if you assume that the demonstrative is ahead and you have entity movement, there is no problem. So this would be here, right? So if you assume something like this, where the numeral is the specifier of one, the demonstrator is going to be P, and then you have the quantifier specifier. Here, if you get movement, because if you have the demonstrator that can go up, you can predict that the number will some different order. Yeah, I think that should stop here. Right.
So now we have questions and comments. Okay.
I have a question for Maria. I came up with this very regularly. There is still a possibility of analyzing these democratic activities, right? So, and they are typical, should predict that they have a hybrid behavior between being maximal and minimal at the same time. And this also should, or maybe perhaps fit some expectation in chamber theory if the final properties of this demonstrative can be demonstrated as activity. I mean, the question would be, have you been ruled out this critical analysis possibility?
Yes, I think this is possible. So one thing I was struggling with, and that's why I ended up going with the head one. So two things. The first one would be that those facts, right? But of course, I haven't shown you this very well, but I think so. When it comes to simple nouns, I think it's very difficult to distinguish between the two analyses, between a head and something that is specified like minimum and maximal at the same time. For the relative clause, of course, it depends on whether the analysis is on the right track. But if you have something that's a key that makes a CV complement, and there has someone trouble moving it with, something that comes from the specifier as a predicate. But I think for the other cases, I think it's not very easy to distinguish between the two. And one small problem is that the language is very understudied, so we don't know a lot. I think what would be nice, for example, is to know how other predictions behave in the language and see the demonstrative pattern or something that's more clearly, let's say, predicted. But it's a good question.
That's a question.
I was
more in the sense of non-corporation, so stages in non-corporation, but the credit itself, with the object is what that we want. And the other suggestion is to check whether you have theological locations. If you have five frequent nouns with this specific type of verb, we will have collocation. And in that case, what will help is to check more like the type frequency. Not the frequency as well, but type frequency. Whether you have all types of conjugated verbs with this noun, or whether there's just a couple of conjugations that show up with the verbs. Meaning that there is no analysis changes now. This kind of yeah, I have a few of them.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I absolutely agree with both points. The first one is that it's not really, I would say it is a motion event, but it's not obviously not an event in the sense of going to a specific reference of the schema. So it's more the social activity creating incorporation. Type token thing, I agree too, so there seems to be some kind of scheme. But that's still what I would be wanting to find out. I don't know if there is an answer to that. So maybe it's just, maybe it really is just, what's the word? Maybe it is just real coincidence if you have the definite article of where. The definite article too in those structures analyzed escuela, those structures too, when analyzed as weak definites, have been analyzed as incorporation. So just like the escuela. And that, I mean, I gave a quote from Manuel Leonetti, who said that there is no way of predicting that it might be right. But I don't know, I was just trying to start and think of any property beyond coincidence that could give us a hint of where we have more or less of the activity readings. So I don't know, but thank you very much.
Thanks. I have a related question. That is the last one, because I agree with Rosa that this you should look more at the collocation issue. So if it is right that there is a collocation issue there, how do you account, how your idea of avoiding syncretism is going to explain the fact that only with some exists this seems to happen, right? So that's, I think that this is really something we should look at. Otherwise, the proposal is weakened. So, and let me also ask as a national speak.
I was going to ask you.
I didn't like any of the examples without that. I just but this is, of course, an anecdote. Another point is that, as far as I know, Carolina Oceano, the work you quoted, I think that the Uruguay is more propense to this type of articulous construction. I don't know if this corresponds with your data, but as far as I can tell, I think that this is more productive in Uruguay with some young people.
Thank you. Yeah, where actually that she's from Uruguay, and she always said really a lot of Spanish, but yeah. So this is an interesting point in my data. I couldn't really find big differences. What is interesting is that, like you said, you didn't like any of the examples. Did you not like the examples with the end?
Except the one when you say, "Ida escuela."
Oh yeah, because that's
Exactly.
that's what it
Because
is.
it's a kind of a
Ida
modifier.
escuela.
Exactly. Yeah. That was giving that idea, but
Do you like that too? Did I spell?
yeah, but it doesn't mean that it's
I know.
according to that.
Yeah.
That's a different
You you are a student at public school.
Yes, una pública es de pobres. That works.
Para ir a escuela,
No, not as
está
much.
mal.
There is an interesting work on modification of weak definites, which shows that the only modifiers that are okay are kind of modifiers. But as far as I know, there's no work claiming for a certain variety that you only get a modified weak definite, but not the unmodified counterpart. So what you're saying now is very interesting. It's something I haven't stumbled across anywhere. Saying that I squared public is good, but I squared is terrible. It's very interesting. Thank you. And
Yes.
Necessarily my house. To have the opportunity to think something about it, opportunity to control. That is a possessive construction implication because in a class, in Spanish you have, that's possessive implications. It's different from the question is, if you have the opportunity to check possessive implications in your play.
the answer is short. The answer is no. I didn't have the opportunity to check because that was like I said, the experiment design was very basic, and it was pandemic times as well, so I wasn't there. However, I do agree that oftentimes there is possessive there's possession semantics to it. So casa está en Galicia, for instance, you say está na casa, está en la casa, and meaning the same. But then on the other hand, when you look at the lexemes I looked at, when you look at the lexeme I looked at, you don't own the school, right? But I agree that that's a point for at least some lexemes. Yes, thank you.
Andrés.
Oh, you see?
Actually, just about the houses, that I think the house behaves differently though from the other ones because I have worked a bit on a similar thing in Greek. And house, for example, is the only one that allowed any sort of multiplication without the article and other things. So I think it's that dice estoy en casa de Juan, for example, without you can say that.
In Spanish?
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Which is a bit big. With the other ones, I cannot do that. So in English, right, home in English is the only noun that allows. So I think house is a bit unique.
But it's similar to, home is similar to papa and mama, right?
Yeah.
Because you can say vera mamá, vera papa, but not vera tío or vera tía. And so it's also a type of logophonic collocation. Because it's not only possessive, because you have, you can have uncles, but you don't say vera tío. You have papa, mama, and casa, which is something like related to some special domain of.
Alienability.
Yeah. So I think that I think that they are special. These three ones are special.
Can I have a last comment? I was going to leave you alone with that. And I just want to touch quickly on your hypothesis of definition stages of making this a case of compensation, of the DRN going away. That is for me a little difficult to understand because of all the situations require a single argument, right? So there's no couple of arguments competing for case margin. So that I don't know how to do it. So, but yeah.
I agree on that. The basic there's no way of doing anything in predicting which collocations have the definite article and which don't. So I was just starting to think towards the direction of maybe that's a way to get closer to one meaning, one form, in the sense of one form for each morphological, for each case. But I agree that this is not a very strong hypothesis. It's just a first thought, a first take on it. And it's also something that there is even work saying or putting forward the idea that in those incorporation structures there's no case assignment at all. And then, which you can show with other languages because you don't have case morphology. But then too, yeah, I don't know, it's really something that's still going on in my head at very recent stuff, but I agree that this is not the solution to the problem.
Okay, any more questions?
Just a clarification question for Maria. Regarding the use of the demonstrative with the pronoun, then this is the way in which you can use, let's say, something similar to a verb demonstrative. So if you want to say, like in Spanish case, you use always the inflection of the third person plus the demonstrative, and in that case you can find any type of demonstrative. So you can say third singular, distant, prox, it's always the same, and the order is the same.
Yeah, so what is interesting that you can also just have the demonstrative on its own, the pronominal use. Yes, so any demonstrative can go there. But what is interesting is that you can also always have just the demonstrative in a pronominal use. And what I haven't been able to figure out is what the exact semantic difference is. I'm trying to do that. I know that with third person it's easier than with first and second. So I try to attaching it to first and second person pronouns, for example. And I mean, out of the blue, they say that this is bad. But I did find one instance where it was okay. So on the phone. So if you say like something like me, something is you could apparently use first person pronoun plus the demonstrative, the proximal one in that case. But anyway, yeah, like so you could have any of them if that's what, but you can also just have the demonstrative as well.
How which would be the order? So the inflection, because you have
The demonstrative in the higher position, which are and then you have the lower one, right? And what is the inflection then? And why the order is always the same? You have a pronoun demonstrative, right? If I remember well. And then the assumption, I mean, I trying to figure out the tree.
Depends where the pronoun is. So, because I think the pronoun. So the problem is that the pronoun it also has some almorphy, and so what you see with the demonstrative is the short form of the small pronoun, let's say. And so I think that, for example, if you say that this is somewhere where also the noun would be, then it would be under the key, right?
Yeah.
So that's why the order would be the same. But I think it does depend on your assumptions about what the pronoun part spells out. Yeah. Any more questions, comments?
I have a very naive question since I don't understand the
course. No, it's fine. And what's interesting is that for some things they're the same, for other things they're not, right? So that's the interesting part. But yeah, it's okay that they are different. Another is complicated because they have a dedicated and a foreign demonstrative, which is different. I didn't talk about that. Yes, this thing is a little bit strange in the sense that it doesn't have articles, but it has a bunch of D-like editors. Yes. So they have 3 spatial ones, 1 anaphoric, 3 temporal ones, which are all anaphoric. And they even have 2 reinforcers that can attach to any combination of those. So they do have a very complex system of anaphora. But that being said, the spatial ones of their own are rarely used for anaphora. I think because they're dedicated ones that I've heard. So I have not seen uses, for example, the medial and distal one in anaphoric context. Now the proximal is a bit more complicated because sometimes it has definite meanings. In that sense, it's anaphoric. Yes. Yeah. Yes, but there is this dedicated anaphoric thing, and they always prefer that. So, for example, if you do sequel, like stories, and you say, once upon a time was a child, they will always use the anaphoric demonstrative. They have a very strong preference for it. Yes. Yeah. Concrete.
Yes, please. Thank you very much.